We had two fantastic games today. The 76ers pulled a game back against the Atlanta Hawks to tie the series. Joel Embiid was massive, got 40 points. And in a very, very interesting game, this is how the playoff should be. The Utah Jazz triumphed over the LA Clippers. Not surprising that the Clippers choked again in crunch time. They couldn't really make the shots at the end. The Jazz got a big enough lead to just about clinch it over the Clippers, but it was a fun game nevertheless. Lots to talk about in today's episode. The Sixers needed to win this game after the first game embarrassment, I must call it, against the Atlanta Hawks. And when they did, 118 to 102, Joel Embiid, a monstrous performance yet again, a playoff career high for him, 40, topping the 39 he got in game 1. It's the first Philadelphia 76er to get a 40-point game in a playoff since Allen Iverson. How long ago was that? 2003. It took them 18 years to get a 40-point game. That's kind of embarrassing for Philadelphia 76ers. They've been terrible since Allen Iverson, I guess.
Excuse me, it's called the process. They have a name for it. This being terrible, there's a design to it.
This was a game though that was summarized by the Sixers were running away, the Hawks were catching up. The Sixers were running away again, and the Hawks were catching up again. And this was the case until the Hawks got a slender lead in the third quarter, and then of all people, Shake Milton showed up and scored 40.
Yeah.
And then it was a little too much for the Hawks to catch up, and that's how the Sixers eventually won it. Embiid was great, like I said, 40 points. Clint Capella couldn't handle him at all, and that's what Embiid does to you, right? He finished second today in MVP voting, which kind of pissed him off, I guess. But no surprises there. But if this is the Embiid you're going to get for the rest of the series, we had doubts about how fit he was. He didn't show any signs of injury or any shakiness at all. If this is the Embiid you're going to get for the rest of the series, is this game over for the Hawks? Because there's no way of stopping him. He'll go to the basket, he'll bully you, and he'll score. Or he'll score with jumpers, he can score the three. How do you even stop this guy?
Well, you don't. But that's true of any team with a superstar like that. How do you beat them? You don't... of course, you don't hope that anyone gets injured, but you don't shut down a player like this either. And anyway, let's assume Embiid continues to play at this level, which is pretty outstanding. First two games, he's been amazing. Can Philadelphia expect to get that every night? Sure, maybe. But can they expect Seth Curry and Milton, of all people, to combine for like 9 of 11 from 3? Mm-hmm. That's not an every night thing. Seth Curry is good, but he's not 5 or 6 good every night. Mm-hmm. Shake Milton's not going to give you that kind of efficiency. So it's the little things where you claw back. It's not going to be easy for the Hawks. But they have a bigger problem. It's not Embiid, but you knew Embiid would be a problem if fit. You knew they had shooting. Now 9 of 11 is a bit too much from Curry and Milton, but you knew they had 3 shooting all over the floor. But you do too as Atlanta, right? So
right.
It just came down to the big difference for me in game 1 and 2. Embiid was pretty much the same, maybe a little more effective on defense, but largely the same performance-wise. Where the difference really showed up was the way they defended Trae Young, because that's the outlet. That's where everything starts. Remember how if James Harden's on the floor, that's the first guy you guard on the Brooklyn Nets. You still have two big problems, but you start with guarding James Harden because that's where the offense begins. If it's Lakers, it's LeBron. If it's Mavs, it's Luka. If it's the Hawks, it's Trae. And in game 1, they largely put Danny Green on him. And you could see everyone just conclude, this is not going to work. This isn't San Antonio Spurs Danny Green. If it was, that'd be a good bet. But he's tapered off since then. Toronto was kind of like the last gasp. But after that, in the Lakers team, I mean, he was decent in a good team defense. Nothing spectacular individually. If Bradley was always the better option. And when he was gone, it was KCP or Caruso. So then, who defends Trae Young? Because the key to winning for the Hawks should be that Trae Young gets going and gets everyone else going, rather than can we shut down Embiid? You can't. So then you come up with your own offense. And anyway, the reason why I bet so big on the Hawks, even in the first round, is because I said as good as New York's defense is, they can't handle Atlanta's offense. That offense kind of went missing today. And that is credit to the guy who I'm sure is going to get lambasted by casuals for ridiculous numbers on offense, single-digit points, Ben Simmons. No excuses there. He was right. He just didn't do too much on offense. But for large parts, he was the primary defender on Trae Young. He cut off outlets. He cut off passing angles. He pushed back on a lot of what would have been easy separation shots if that was Danny Green. Made Trae Young inefficient on shooting, limited Trae Young's playmaking ability, and that was the difference. So for the rest of the series, for Philadelphia, they've got to make sure they put Ben Simmons on Trae Young. And if not, as a second option, rather than Danny Green, maybe Thybulle would be a better pick, right? Because I think he's younger, fresher, a lot more hustle. He's kind of their Bridges. So, Mikal Bridges, that is. So, I think the key is there. I think the key is in getting the Atlanta offense going and not worrying so much about how to shut down Embiid. Do your best. It's what you can do against players like that. And then you come up with your own 5-round offense. It was the offense that went missing. That was why they lost. And Ben Simmons should get some credit. I hope somebody gives him some credit for his defense. Yes, offense was nothing to write home about.
I think you hit the nail on the head there when you said Ben Simmons kind of silenced Trae Young today. He got 21 points, but 6 out of 16 from shooting. That's not Trae Young. Like, that was not the Trae Young you saw against the New York Knicks. It was not the Trae Young you saw in Game 1 as well. So that kind of was the difference. Absolutely correct. The one of the telling stats in this game, in the first half, the Atlanta bench scored 26-0 against the Philadelphia 76ers. I mean, that was hilarious to see until Shake Milton decided this looks really bad and I got to come out there and change this. And then Philadelphia went on and got the bench scoring. And I think Milton was the difference. This is the game you'll go out and remember as a Shake Milton game because he went out and shot 3 threes. He got 14 points in 14 minutes. And the Hawks just ran out of gas chasing them because the lead was big that they could not make a comeback in this game. Yeah. This is kind of one of the telling things about the championship contender team, right? The depth in them. I mean, Shake Milton played like 48 minutes in the 6 playoff games so far. Almost all of them garbage time, which nobody really counts. And then he comes off in a pretty important game, in a must-win game for the Sixers, I must say, and scores those important 14 points in 14 minutes. And when you look at the Sixers bench, I think they're pretty deep there as well. You have Thybulle, whom you said, one of the better defenders on the team. You have Korkmaz, who can just go off and shoot the 3 whenever he wants. And when required, Dwight Howard can come out and get you a double-double. In a short span of time, he can play 15 minutes and get you a double-double. So that's a pretty deep bench and usually one of the hallmarks of a championship contender team.
Yeah, it's the deepest squad in the East, just in terms of how well-rounded they are and how capable they are. Atlanta have a deep squad too, but Philadelphia just have more experience, more veterans, more playoff experience, more championship DNA, all of that good stuff. Dwight Howard, not only can he get you a double-double if you give him enough minutes, he'll be pretty efficient at it. And the big addition here when you have a guy like Dwight Howard, and something that helped the Lakers a lot last season, Dwight Howard and McGee, is then you keep away all the contact, all those shoulder bumps with the other team's big man. You keep your best player away from it in the post, which is in the Lakers case it was AD, and in the Sixers case it's Embiid. It saves you that many bruises and that much wear and tear against, say, somebody like a Capella, who I'm not saying Embiid can't handle, but why take the physical punishment if Dwight can do a decent job as well?
True.
Right? And both these teams would and should rely heavily on Dwight Howard to do that, to be the protector, sort of, not just of the rim, but also of their prized asset. Because in Anthony Davis and Joel Embiid, these two franchises have two of the most delicate big men in recent memory. Like, they'll go down at the drop of a hat, so you've got to protect them at all costs. I like the Sixers bench. A bunch of them can defend too. That's what makes them so impressive. Unlike with the Atlanta bench, which is just their entire team's pure offense. They have so many options, like, depending on who starts, right? But Thybulle, Korkmaz, all of these non-elite, like, first cadre players can all do the 3 and D, or can do the D exceptionally well or the 3 exceptionally well. One of these, and they've got so much diversity there that they're a tough beat. Like I said, if Embiid's fit, they're a tough beat. But otherwise, if either Embiid or Simmons goes out, I'm picking the Hawks all the way easy. But
the series is well set up when they go to Atlanta, because Atlanta have been so strong at home. They haven't lost in their last 9, I believe. And that'll be a tough challenge for the Sixers to overcome.
And Philly suck away also. They're not very great.
Yes, added to that. So the series is set up perfectly. The game that was perfect for a playoff game today was the Jazz against the Clippers. The Clippers started off pretty bright. The Jazz were terrible. I mean, they missed 21 shots in a row. Yeah. And how do you win a game when you miss 21 shots in a row? Only the Clippers can answer that, because they were at the receiving end of Donovan Mitchell 45-point game. He scored 32 in the second half. It was his fourth 40-point game in a playoff series, tying the franchise record. 4 times he's done it along with Karl Malone, who played 193 games, by the way.
Yep.
Donovan Mitchell has played 27 games and he's got 440 plus points. Incredible performance. There was a stat before the game. Whenever a team plays game 7, they win the game 1 of the next series only 41% of the time. You're tired, you don't get much time off, and it's pretty evident. I mean, if I had to put money on this game, I would have blindly put it on Jazz because I knew that the Clippers are going to come out tired, fatigued, whatnot. But it was actually the Jazz that came out rusty, and they did not really start the first quarter well. But then Donovan Mitchell really stepped up. I mean, at the end of the third quarter, just before the start of the fourth, he sat his team down and said, "Well, they just played the game 2 days back. You hit 2 threes at the start, and they're going to already start looking for game 2." And that's exactly what they did. They got 2 threes, and the Clippers were trailing, and then it was pressure time, and then. The Clippers, how they perform under pressure.
Yeah. When did these guys get so smart, the Jazz? That's what I want to know. Like, I know there was skill always, but they're talking like teams that have been to this finals a bunch of times, won the championship. Look, with what do I say about the Clippers, man? It's the most annoying. If you're a Clippers fan, this is the most annoying squad ever, because there are squads where you have no chance and you live with it. Whatever, you hope for the best, but you kind of know what's coming. There are squads where they're amazing and they play amazing. Then there's this Clippers squad, which should make sense when people say they're the favorites or they should be among the top contenders. And then they go out and some nights they play like they are. Some nights they play like they're the Pelicans. It makes no sense. And sometimes it's incredibly annoying how two supposedly, and I say supposedly only because they haven't shown it in a long time consistently, the 2 best defensive wings in the game. How many times have you heard that? Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Why is it that they never ever pick up the best player on the other team? Like, if the argument is Donovan Mitchell is a size mismatch, they wanted to put someone smaller on him. Okay, Luka's the exact same size as Kawhi Leonard.
True.
Paul George has an inch on him. What was the excuse? Why in the world was Batum guarding Luka for that entire series when consistently he's tossed you 2 years in a row? And then there's this series. Donovan Mitchell's going off. You let a guy who's that inexperienced in the playoffs drop 45 on you. All this while being guarded by Pat Beverly, who's got you all fooled, by Jackson, and I don't know who the hell else they put on him. I don't even know. I think
Luke Kennard.
Yeah. Kennard was on him for a bit. So it makes no sense. Like, when are the best defensive players in the game going to play a little defense? The Clippers are like a team that can do it all, but like they'll just wait. They'll wait for you to fail. Are we going to catch some lucky breaks? Maybe you'll have an off night. Maybe I'll win a game here and there. But if I have to, okay, fine. We'll play basketball. It's the worst kind of team to support, where there's potential. Not that I don't know who's supporting them anymore, but where there's potential and then it doesn't show up. And by the way, Utah Jazz put up 53s. Clippers shot a bunch too, but the Utah Jazz put up 53 attempts.
Yep.
3 attempts. They're the Houston Rockets with an actual plan. Like, they're last season's Rockets, but with an actual defense and a plan and a big guy, and they didn't trade away their big guy. They gave him a big ass contract.
Yep.
I love it. They had it wasn't a particularly great shooting night, but they kept shooting anyway. And when you put up 53 attempts, some of them are going to go in at some point. And
I think when you make 34-35%, I think most times you should win.
Exactly. And Clippers, they had how many times? They blew a 13-point halftime lead.
Yep.
Not for the first time. I don't know. I don't think for the last time. But credit where it's due. Donovan Mitchell was an absolute star on the court. Just completely dominated the stat sheet, the court. He was scoring on everyone. He eventually was hitting the mid-range pretty well, though I don't think he had a very bright start to write home about.
Yep.
Then he's taking it to the rim against players much larger than him. He's not a very big guy.
Yep.
He's somewhere in that Dame Lillard frame. Right? He's not exactly a big guy. He's taking it to the hoop for fun. And not a guy on that court has an answer for him. And I love that. They took the game to the Clippers. They whooped the Clippers. The scoreline is misleading. That was embarrassing for the Clippers. The kind of lead they had, how rusty the Jazz were, to go on and drop that game. Yeah, I don't know. And final statement, I love how the Jazz just are relentless on 3 attempts. I just keep coming back to that so many times in the game. There are teams where you create the 3 shot and you take it, like say the Warriors or even the Rockets, where most of their plays are designed to try and find an open 3 or a high percentage 3. Jazz will do whatever it takes to shoot a 3. Like there are times where like Bogdanovich got a steal somewhere in and around the paint or top of the key or whatever.
Yep.
He ran to the corner 3, shot a 3. Like he had no reason to. He could just go and lay it up. No, run to the corner 3, shoot the 3. I love that commitment to shooting threes. Like they recognize that this is their game plan.
They are a team with a plan. And this was the problem I had with Clippers all season long. They are a team without a plan because what is the main problem they had? They did not know their 5. They did not know who are the 5 people going to be on the court in case of a close game. You know that Paul George and Kawhi Leonard is going to be there.
They don't know that 2 also right now. Like who's the best 2 you put on the perimeter?
I kind of thought they kind of figured it out in game 6 and 7 against the Mavs because you had Reggie Jackson who was going off, you had Marcus Morris who was hitting those threes, so they kind of cemented their places, and you had Batum who was there and giving, instead of Zubac, right? He was the number 5, kind of a small ballish number 5, you could say.
Sure.
But then Luke Kennard came out of nowhere in game 7. He had a good game, I mean, except on defense. He had a great game offensively. Zubac had a decent game as well, but they were not in plan. They were not a part of the plan when they were playing the Mavs. They just suddenly woke up and like, okay, today will be a good day to play Zubac, and it does not work out that way. I mean, you can compare it to the Lakers from last season, but the Lakers from last season knew what they were doing. When they put Dwight Howard on the court, they knew what they were doing. When they removed Dwight Howard and played AD at the 5, they did it from game 1 itself. They knew what they were doing.
Yeah.
Unlike the Clippers who play 5 games and then decide to switch it along. So you don't really have a consistent team playing all the time, and that kind of hurt them throughout the season, I would say, and it's kind of hurting them now in the playoffs as well.
The sad part is, despite their absolute reluctance to put their brain to chart out any kind of map, it was just a 3-point game. On a different night, that shot goes in, it goes to overtime. I mean, it not that it was a close miss, he just got blocked. But
He got blocked.
some other day he gets it off and maybe it goes in. Also, they weren't particularly impressive, the Clippers. They had a lot of distributed scoring, which is unusual. It wasn't Kawhi or PG taking off. They had amazing production off the bench. Zubac gave them some. Luke Kennard 3 was dropping again, continuing his form from not even game 7, like the second half of game 7, pretty much, where he started lighting up. So it's funny in Marcus Morris. The Morris brothers are a blessing to LA. Like last season, it was Markieff who came out of nowhere in the playoffs for the Lakers. Especially when they played small ball. And then Marcus Morris, he's basically the Clippers' Jay Crowder. He's that for them. He's that guy with the muscle. He's the guy doing the dirty fouls. Last season, this season, same thing. And he's their 3-and-D guy, where on one night he'll give you like 6 of 8, 6 of 9 from 3 shooting, and on other nights like this, he'll be 1 of 9, and then it's miserable. And you have to overcome your own player before you overcome the opponents. But that's what you get with streaky shooters like these guys. Crowder's the same too. He'll be on fire one night and then he just can't make it to save his life the other, right? You mentioned this in the previous episode. So, couple of things go this way, that way. Maybe they don't choke another double-digit lead at halftime. Clippers, they could have had a game. So
they could have.
Yeah, this series it's not like it's going to be one-sided. Nobody expects it to be. And you know the Clippers only wake up once their ass is on fire. But let's hope they take it home. One big disadvantage though, which we were talking about earlier, is Utah have possibly the best home crowd atmosphere in the NBA right now.
True.
Given that some other teams have permission issues, whatever. They were better. This crowd was better than Madison Square Garden, even on the first night of playoffs.
Yep.
Largely because, unlike the Garden, this team had a team that could play in the playoffs. Harsh, I know. But best crowd atmosphere, right up there with Phoenix. Makes you want a Phoenix-Utah conference finals. But yeah, that's going to be one more thing for the Clippers to overcome, because LA, I don't think, has those kind of approvals, right, for crowds. They're not going to have a packed house. So yeah, that's a tough beat.
Paul George was terrible again. No surprises. He scored 20 points if you look at the box scores, but then he went 4 of 17 on shooting. I mean, this is Paul George. What's wrong with him?
This is Paul George. What do you mean what's wrong? This is Paul George.
He had 31% from 3 against the Mavs the entire series. He had a decent 3-point night. I would say decent because he got the clutch 3 at the end, which kind of brought them down to 3. But He was 4 from 17. That's not, you're not winning a game when your second best player in the team has that kind of figures. So, have you written off Paul George completely yet?
No, he's just like the Clippers. He's exactly like the Clippers. He just suck one night, decide to show up another night, choke when it matters most. Fourth quarter, you never know what you'll get from the guy. My only complaint on Paul George is, and by the way, that box score is misleading only because he went to the line a bunch of times and he usually excellent from free throws. My only complaint on him is you take a player like Ben Simmons, who's also technically, I mean, he has the size to be a two-way wing, though he's a point guard. He has the size for a power forward, really, but
he can play all 5 positions.
You put Ben Simmons on the court. Some nights he gets you points when Embiid's not there. A lot of nights he gets you playmaking and rebounding here and there and a triple-double threat. But even on off nights, like tonight against the Hawks, offensively it was an off night, but defensively he was the game changer. He was the reason Atlanta's offense got choked up. Because he cut off the supply, he cut off the pipeline at the source on Trae Young and made Trae Young an ineffective scorer. It's not like Trae Young is a playmaker alone. So he contributes. One way or another, he makes a difference. And on off nights, well, okay, you have off nights. But even when offense isn't flowing, that's the whole point of being a two-way player. Not that you're dominant on both ends of the floor every night. You could be on your day. But even when you're not really firing on offense, offense can be a form thing. Offense can be a temperament thing. Sometimes a confidence thing. Sometimes the stroke just isn't there. You're not feeling it. You're not getting hot. Defense is fundamentals. There's not too much that you can do. There's a limited set of things, but you have to do it well with discipline and with athleticism. Paul George, what the hell is Paul George's excuse on defense? I get off nights on offense. Dude just doesn't try. And it's Utah. It's not like, okay, Donovan Mitchell is their best player. They've got a bunch of other players that can do damage. Guard someone, guard anyone. He was guarding very half-heartedly, I might add, Clarkson for a short bit. Clarkson danced all around him, took a step back three, sent him the...
He scored 6 threes.
Yeah, that's not Paul George. Just one-on-one, you're going to get outplayed by Jordan Clarkson, really? Once in a while, sure, but what was surprising there was no effort. He just, he created a bit of separation. Paul George like, screw it, I'll get him next time. He just walks off. So, Paul George is the Clippers are Paul George. Just frustrating, so much talent, hardly ever shows up, except when asses are on fire. It's incredibly annoying. At least play defense, man. We get that your shot is not dropping.
I agree. You did mention that the 2 stars didn't play well and they still lost just by 3. It could have gone either way if that shot could have gone in.
Yeah.
And then you never know in overtime, right? But you also have to remember that Jazz had no Mike Conley today.
Yeah.
And yet they managed to come out as victors. So does that mean that Jazz continue to be favorites for the rest of the series, or is it still going to be close because once Mike Conley is in, they have an advantage? And how do you see the Clippers coming back from this?
Yeah, no doubt they have an advantage when Conley comes back. Ingles started. I don't think the Jazz won that too often. But they've got, I think with the Jazz, it's never one. It doesn't work like this starting lineup got you 115. Conley comes in, it's going to be 125. It's a very different. Their best, the best thing about the Jazz is because of how many options they have, starters and bench.
Right.
They can play so many configurations, and we've spoken about this before. No team right now in the NBA is as creative offensively in team ball as the Utah Jazz.
True.
The number of set pieces, the number of plays they have, all those staggered screens that we spoke about in great detail. So they adapt with Conley, without Conley. I think they can survive one player going away unless that player is Donovan Mitchell or Gobert. They'll live with it. With any other player, they'll find ways to make it work on offense. So if I'm the Clippers, I'm not too worried about does Conley come back? How do I play when he comes back? I'm more worried about when the hell am I going to play? Like, when are my players going to show up? Kawhi Leonard, game like this, maybe tired, whatever, missed load management. Maybe he was just chilling on the floor. He'll come back, he'll turn into Terminator Kawhi at the drop of a hat. Nobody is questioning Kawhi Leonard.
True.
Although you could on defense. But alright, so Kawhi will do his thing. Rest of the team, Paul George, hello, maybe defense, maybe pass the ball. What I loved about him in Game 7 was even his shot wasn't dropping. This isn't like it's been going on for a bit now. Shot wasn't falling. Dude makes himself extremely resourceful in playmaking. That was legit playmaking. It wasn't that he was just giving passes and they turned into shots. He really was drawing the defenders, swing, it's like making the defense lose their shape, driving in, passing it off. At least do that. I'm looking at Paul George. I couldn't care less what the other players do here. Kawhi's reputation is on the line because Paul George is his teammate. Same last season, same this season. You better show up, man.
All right, so that was the second game today. Just one game tomorrow. The Phoenix Suns take on Denver Nuggets, who now have an MVP in their ranks because Nikola Jokic was awarded the MVP, the first Denver Nugget to win the award. The first big man since Shaq won it in 2000. And I must say, well-deserved award as well because he averaged 26 points, 10.8 rebounds, 8.3 assists. That's almost a triple-double for the entire season in which he played every single game. So that's phenomenal. Is one of a kind in the entire league. We've said that Porzingis was a unicorn. I think Nikola Jokic is a unicorn because there's no one like him in the league. There's no one close to him in the league. He plays point center. I mean, what kind of a position is that? Where did that come out from? I think well-deserved award. Very humble guy. You always root for him whenever he's playing, except if he's playing against your favorite team. You're always rooting for Jokic to do well. And he often does well as well. So, but big game tomorrow. He kind of had an off night the other day in game 1. DeAndre Ayton, you could say, kind of silenced him. But big game tomorrow. How do you see that going?
Ayton did well for himself. Jokic MVP, well deserved. I made a case for Steph Curry, whatever, it was worth the shot, but well deserved. I think when are the NBA going to stop shitting on Europeans? Like, when will they get their fair value? 41st in the draft. Really?
Yep. The lowest draft guy to win the MVP. Yep.
Yeah. Now, if that was really the assessment, okay. But I doubt it was. I think the question is, if he was an American, would he have gone higher? I think he would. A good 10-15 spots above. So maybe start waking up, stop shitting on European players so much. All this trash talk around Giannis on Embiid. Luka's not worth it. It's all Trae Young. Shut up. And like all this is garbage. If Trae Young got out of the first round before Luka did, where are all the young haters who said Luka's better, whatever? He is better. Right now, he is better. It's not even a comparison. Neither of them plays defense. One of them is 6'7". He is better. Like, there's no comparison. And speaking of, got out of the first round before the other guy, really. Dwayne Wade and LeBron James entered the league together. Dwayne Wade won the chip 6 years before LeBron. What does that prove? Like, is he better than LeBron? No, not really. So, back to Jokic. Whatever he's doing is innovation on another level. He is pretty much inventing a new hybrid position, the kind that we've not seen before. The game has seen many evolutions. Point guards became scorers. Scoring guards became 3-and-D guys somewhere down the line. Wings started being recognized as two-way players. Like, you get credit for actually playing basketball.
True.
They've divided the game into two halves apparently now, and you get credit if you play both halves. And in all this, you then add stretch bigs thanks to Steph Curry, because now everyone has to shoot the three, and because of that you need spacing. Then you add this guy. He's a stretch big. Legit stretch big.
Yep.
Who can then pass to any point on the floor from that vantage point. The paint isn't the greatest vantage point, the perimeter is. And he can pass to pretty much anyone. And they gave him a bunch of slashers, cutters, scorers. They gave him a decent perimeter. It's a crying shame that Jamal Murray isn't here this season.
Yep.
Would have been so much fun with another weapon given to Jokic. But whatever Jokic is doing right now, it's innovation. Whatever he does, it's the first of its kind, because there's never been a player like that. That size, stretch big, which itself is a new concept, but a stretch big point center. What's going on? So, all that aside, game 2, Jokic has to forget all this. If he can create, great. But they need Jokic the scorer first, because Phoenix, they didn't start all that brightly in game 1, Phoenix.
Yep.
But they will look to every game. And as the Lakers found out the hard way, if they get it on, they'll blitz you. By halftime, it'll be so many body blows, it'll be tough to recover. And then they play that stifling defense and they just hustle you off the floor in the third quarter. And then you're looking at a big divide, a big gap in the fourth quarter where you're saying, okay, you're going to come strong, you'll get a few key points and you'll build momentum. No, you won't. Because Chris Paul will hold that ball. He just stand. He'll cross half line and he'll just stand there until you get bored and fall asleep, and then he'll shoot a 3. So this team's they're really built for playoff basketball. I can't believe I didn't see this. The way I used to speak about Miami last season, that this is a team built for the postseason, whatever they do in the regular season. That's the Phoenix Suns. So they need Jokic to start bright and they need Jokic to be a scorer first. As well, he can be. Ayton did well, but Jokic at his best would give Ayton trouble, at least on offense. So my take is that that's what he should be doing. But I'll be interested. I'll be interested in seeing what they come up with. Credit to Devin Booker and Donovan Mitchell, by the way. You know you're a superstar by how many plan Bs and Cs you force from the opponents in a playoff series.
Right.
Every time they have to adjust, make a switch, just because you are on court, you're a superstar. That's you. That's Luka, that's Trae Young, that's Devin Booker, that's Donovan Mitchell. So very interesting to see what they come up with in game 2. But just don't let Phoenix start hot because it's only going downwards from there.
Absolutely. It should be a fun game, especially given how Denver loves to come back from behind. So it'll be a fun game. Either ways, I think the Phoenix Suns are strong, but you never count out the Joker. It'll be a great contest, and we'll talk all about it tomorrow.
All right. Cheers, man.
Bye.